Well, based on our first part, things won't look good for the Duterte administration by the end of the second and third year. Before or during the midterm elections, maybe there will be a slight uptick because of the election spending, and after that, maybe the deluge, which we hope will not happen if there are changes and more pro-people real policies. But this is also all going to happen in the context of the global economic and financial situation. What are your projections? That's my question, because it's about 10 years now since the last global financial crisis that started in New York, and that one was around 10 years after the 1998 Asian financial crisis. So the cycle of 10 years seems to be coming into full completion again, and maybe we're looking into some very likely financial crisis globally. How will the Philippines cope under President Duterte?
I think actually it's a very good point. We can sort of presume that this is a cycle happening every 10 years, but we can't do anything about what's happening outside of the country. So I think precisely that really underscores how we have to get our own domestic house in order. And I think that's where the problem is. If we don't have economic policies that rely on creating domestic jobs, if we're relying on overseas work, or we're relying on BPOs, which is essentially
it's now declining. Is that correct? The BPOs?
Yeah, for the last 2 quarters, pledges for BPOs have been actually going down.
Again, what has been going down?
The pledges for BPO.
Meaning
investment.
The seats, they call it them seats from the foreign contractors has been going down?
The commitments to increase investment in BPOs is going down, which will translate into lower seats and lower employment in the Philippines, lower BPO employment. So I think because we can't do anything about what happens abroad,
that's right.
We have to strengthen our own internal capacity, and that's where the Duterte administration is failing. And I think that's where it's very worrying. What we need, bottom line, is we need to create jobs at home, we need to increase incomes at home from strong manufacturing, from strong industry, from strong agriculture, which isn't happening right now. And I think I just have to correct myself. The economy lost 393,000 jobs in April compared to last year.
Year on year.
That's very alarming because despite reported economic growth, we are losing jobs. And that means that the most sustainable source of domestic demand has to come from jobs and people with incomes from those jobs. That is what will be the ultimate driver of the domestic economy. If we're losing jobs, it means 2 things. We're losing the immediate stimulus from domestic consumption, and also it's reflecting something's eroding. Our agriculture is eroding. I think agriculture, I also just checked right now, we lost almost 900,000 jobs in agriculture. That's crazy.
But won't the 100,000 tons new demand from China for fruits and other food products help in that on that score?
It might help the big plantations in Mindanao.
That's right,
but if it's not broad-based demand from abroad, which it actually generally isn't, because we are very marginal agricultural exports. I think it's some fruits, coconut products, which are our main agricultural exports. That is not the whole of our 20 plus million agricultural workforce. I think it will benefit the sector, maybe the few 100,000 in the pineapple industry, especially in the big plantations in Mindanao. But that's not the broad-based agricultural growth and rural income increase that we need.
Well, a lot of the agricultural demand from China will be fruits, and that takes several years to develop and gestate. So I don't know to what extent the government is aware of this, how to effectively tap that demand from China. But let's go on.
I think one major problem right now is the government has been claiming we're feeling some kind of manufacturing resurgence. The problem is, it's a pseudo-manufacturing resurgence. It's a resurgence of foreign investment in economic zones that are importing 85 to 95% of their inputs. Very minimal job generation.
These are primarily semiconductor industry.
It's still electronics. I think it's still about 50 to 60% of our manufacturing exports are still in electronics, semiconductors, and related electronic products. The thing is, the manufacturing resurgence is not translating into manufacturing jobs. The share of employment in manufacturing continues to fall. It's at about 8.5% right now, which is smaller than it was in the 1970s. Secondly, we're also starting to hear that there is already resistance from the neoliberal economic managers of pushing industrialization in the Philippines. Because they're also, again, the usual line, if it's cheaper to import, why produce? Losing sight of, well, if it's cheaper to import now, but you foregoing greater jobs and dynamism in the future, that's a problem. So I think
because you don't have the consumer base. If the population does not have income,
and the jobs and incomes to purchase that. So I think that's very alarming if you put it all together. We're seeing a fake manufacturing resurgence that is foreign investor dependent. Secondly, we're hearing grumblings already from within the economic policy circles that there's resistance to pushing industrialization. So we're losing ground agriculturally. We lost over almost 1 million jobs the last year. And we're also losing prospects for industrialization. And that's crazy in the context of what you said, that there's a volatile global environment and we're seeing a looming financial crisis again.
Well, talking about the volatility of the situation, at the same time, volatility of the peso, declining value of the peso, which, of course, the OFW families would say they can rejoice in because they have added pesos for the dollars they earn. But that, of course, is a conundrum in the sense that they also lose out in terms of the higher cost of electricity and fuel and so on. So where is this going, this devaluation of the peso?
Well, we think the first where it's coming from. In general, there may not necessarily, we can't say absolutely all devaluation is bad. If you have, for instance, the export capacity, take advantage of that.
Are we in a position to take advantage of that?
That's where in the real world we're not, because we don't have the foundation in industrial capacity to export and benefit from devaluation. So if you look at where the devaluation is coming from, I think in our view it comes from two things. It comes from one, the U.S. economy being the economy of last resort, with their increasing interest rates. I think the dollar is really strengthening because things are in the dogs in Europe right now. Asia is still quite uncertain. So I think the US is still seen as a relatively safe haven. So that's strengthening their dollar. On the other side,
in financial terms.
In financial terms.
Yeah.
And then despite the Trump, strangely. And also, one thing very striking, which the government tries to downplay, even remittances are slowing. We were seeing double-digit remittance growth as recently as 10 years ago. It's been in single-digit figures the last 3 years, and it's been continuing to slow in the last few months. So I think if you're losing remittance flows, that actually is a big reason why our reserves are falling right now, and the peso is also devaluing. So I think that's, again, little leading indicators of problems to come from the Philippine economy.
I'll come in at this point just to comment on the dollar. It's a very fragile boost for the dollar, the interest rate boost, and of course their attempt at reducing the QE debt that they have. It's fragile because it's all financial. I would still bet on the yuan if I were to look for a store of value, because China is a manufacturing economy, as well as the world's largest market now, with its population growing middle class with a lot of money and so on. So the dollar as a safe haven, I think, is very iffy, especially with the looming financial crisis that may hit. And for the Philippines, manufacturing is really a big question mark, because if it's a higher end, we don't have the infrastructure for it, semiconductor processing and so on. Assembly, yes, we can do that. That's assembly, that's not manufacturing. But intermediate consumer goods, maybe, and processed food products and so on. Where can the Philippines industrialize? Really, we do not have the steel industry right now, the metals industry, and so on.
Well, the first, regarding the global financial markets, kasi kamentong you're rational eh. You have the wisdom.
The market is not rational.
Yeah, you're looking long term, but the market's not rational. The market is looking for the short term profits. I think right now, exactly, it's self-defeating. It's actually that irrationality.
That's right.
And the short term profit seeking that will actually increase the volatility. So I think you're betting long long life to you.
That's right.
To benefit from that.
Yeah.
In terms of industrialization, I think the government is failing to see it has to be a package. It's not just you look for a revealed comparative advantage right now, which is in like the labor-intensive, cheap products using foreign capital. I think exactly in a larger sense, if you have a rational state, a rational developmental state, for instance, we can develop the steel industry if we do get a progressive tax system, raising revenues from the rich, reinvest that into infrastructure, in irrigation, in transport infrastructure, in roads and bridges. That is actually where you can have the opportunity to develop your steel industry.
I suppose
iron and steel can be built if you link it up with the demand that's actually being created. And I think you go down the line, it's actually quite easy naman to see what the Philippines needs. You look at our import list, check out those things that are just actually transitory lang for economic zones. Look for what's really consumed in the Philippines. That's your short list of industries to develop, because that means there's a demand for that. So I think the leading edge can be iron and steel because nga suppose construction boom tayo. So we should incentivize domestic steel manufacturers and not import the cheap Chinese steel just because it's cheaper.
Well, it'll take more than 10 minutes that we have left to resolve and select industries. No, it's good to point that out. But I also want to say that even major steel producers like the United States has been defeated by India and by China. And so there is for me, very big question mark there. But, well, maybe we can select industries and products in the mid-scale. But I said we cannot resolve this in this discussion. The idea is we should have more manufacturing and production enterprises.
I have a quick comment about the steel. There's a tendency now to disparage the importance of a steel industry, iron and steel industry. But one thing very revealing, out of about 4,000 protectionist measures in the last 5 years, I think, 1/4 have been by the G8 countries to protect their steel industries. I think that says something. So all the people saying forgo protecting steel industry because it's irrelevant, it's a sunset industry, there's so much, it's better to import it cheaper. The fact that even the US and China, of course Korea also, are protecting the steel industries, they're onto something. They know it is still a foundation industry. It's something that will always be needed by an economy. There's an innate internal demand. I think if only for that, matuto tayo, they're doing it. So the fact that they're doing it, they have an insight. Secondly, the fact that they're protecting, that's even greater compulsion for us to protect our own industry.
We'll have one entire session of 50 minutes on the industries and maybe on the steel industry because it's really a vital question. But anyway, we have to move on. Well, so agricultural sector and labor export, of course, we don't like the idea, but it's a reality. And as you say, remittances are declining. China has a potential of recruiting, and I'm sorry to admit this, but it's a market, up to 1 million or 2 million domestic helpers a day. This has been discussed and announced, possibility. That would compensate with the losses in the BPO and so on. Again, I'm not happy about it. But for the immediate necessities of the country to generate employment, do you think it's going to be a crime and a sin to try to look into this potential?
I think
I know it's very uncomfortable because even for me it's an uncomfortable subject.
I think exactly strategically it's the wrong direction. Of course, you should be creating domestic jobs at home. But of course, if there are no jobs at home, there's a short-term welfare of the families to consider. So I think the right approach, is first have that strategic concern to eventually create jobs at home so they don't have to go abroad. But setting that aside, if you have to increase the welfare of overseas Filipinos right now, you have to have the corresponding protection of the rights in welfare. And I think that's where we might have a problem because the Philippines has a very bad track record for protecting the welfare of overseas Filipinos.
But I think China is a better market than the Middle East in terms of distance, and more potential for resolving problems, closer communication, and so on. But again, it's not a happy topic to discuss.
But I think if that can be done, if there's some way for the Philippine government to get real assurance, actually not just verbal assurance, real mechanisms to protect the welfare of Filipinos in China, it's a very bad measure, but it's a stopgap measure.
But again,
I think that tapping that potential will be very self-centered for the government. If they're only doing it as a vent for frustration, that's a problem.
But again, I can link it to the system that we have, where every 6 years there's election. That's as far as an administration can look. 6 years, and so something over more than stopgap might be a bit too far a bridge to cross.
Will they be paid in dollars though? I mean, of course.
Well, the talk has been up to 100,000 pesos equivalent. More than what they are getting in Hong Kong.
Dollars though, or how will they be paid?
In yuan, I would assume.
Well, I think that is going to be a
Well, as I told you off the air, I look towards in the yuan as a better safe haven than the US dollar. But as you said, that's for the long term. Okay. Well, we have a limited time. We have 3-4 minutes. So the international financial crisis may be coming, but that's not something we can do much about, except if we go into currency and capital controls. Which do you see any outlook for that?
We have some wiggle room there because we have a lot of reserves. We have some kind of, I think, goodwill from being...
you mentioned that. We have a lot of reserves. Do we really need more debt?
We don't.
We don't.
There's just so much money slushing around the Philippines right now. The Philippine banking system is about 15 trillion pesos.
Yes.
That's money to be tapped
there. The special deposit account, are you familiar with that?
What about that?
That's that used to be 2 trillion pesos, or around. Am I correct? 40 billion US dollars. Well, anyway, 40. Anyway, forgive the figures because we have limited time, no. But we have a lot of money slushing around, and we have reserves of around 82 billion or 87 billion now, and debt of maybe 72. Why not pay off a major portion of the debt so we save our debt servicing and so on? So there are many measures to generate internally.
Well, so Tola, I think the government's on the right track in borrowing more locally right now. So I think in the last 10 years, we've seen a big shift in government borrowing towards the domestic market. I think that's still something that can be done. The build, we have a big concern about that. We shouldn't have to borrow even from China. If there's a need for capital, we should incentivize or compel the oligarchs have so much money in the Philippines to invest that in the Philippines. So I think the debt that will be created from the
Why aren't the oligarchs freely investing?
Because they've captured the domestic finance market. We have
so they don't have to invest in productive enterprises because they make enough money from playing with that money that they have.
And the government has foregone any sort of sense of development banking. It's foregone any sense of mobilizing
development
domestic finance.
Banking meaning compelling capital holders to channel their capital into productive
government as a direct lender, and government as using its control of their financial system to influence the flow of finances. The government has lost that shred of development banking that started under President Marcos, and I think right now, if you leave it to the market, the oligarchs are looking for where the quick returns are. Right now, it's finance. Right now, it's just sitting on their slush fund rather than
So I cannot be an oligarch because I look at the long term.
Well, we need more of that, actually.
Okay, we're into our last minute, Sonny. We cannot, of course, discuss the whole and entirety of the financial and economic system, but let me sum it up and then you respond. You're not very optimistic with the present direction the Duterte government is going in the economy and the financial policies. If you restate that, what, however, is your proposed solution?
Okay. I think we have to be very clear the Philippine government needs a radical overhaul of its economic policies. It should be a package of developing the domestic economy, meaning domestic agriculture and Philippine industry. It should have a much more expanded social services scheme. It should also have a much more inclusive social protection scheme. We have the resources for that if only the government tax the oligarchs and the wealthy. So I think the first thing we have to do is throw out our neoliberal economic thinking. If that means throwing out our economic managers as well, we should reorient ourselves to relying on Filipino capital, Filipino initiative, Filipino labor, Filipino resources to develop the Philippine economy. As long as we're kowtowing to what foreign capital wants, as long as we're following what neoliberal textbooks teach us, we're not going to get anywhere.
Okay. And so my concern is, though I continue to support the administration of President Duterte because of two major pillars, the foreign policy breakaway from the past, which is has been good and opens up a lot of opportunities, and the anti-drug war, which of course elicits a lot of negative feedback, but I think it is a much needed, but also needs to reform the methods. However, the economy, which is going to be the basis for final success. We hope this will reach the president's ear. That he needs to think more deeply about the direction of the economy and the financial system. Maraming salamat,
Thank you.
Sonny, and I hope your institution does not get tired of repeating this. You've been repeating this for how many decades now? Your institution?
Since 78. So
Since 78.
we're still waiting and working for that change.
Are you gaining ground, you think, in the
Of course
public
we are.
mind?
I think we are. I mean, the fact that this is clamor for change, I mean, we hope to contribute in our own small way to the clamor for change.
Okay, so maraming salamat, Ginoong Sonny Africa, and maraming salamat po sa inyo.